New videos every day.
Hello, everybody. I'm John Breeding. It is Monday, January 9th, 2012 in Austin, Texas. It's a cold, rainy day. Happy New Year, everybody. I've got a special guest here with me, Ryan from down under in Australia. He's visiting the United States, and Ryan is a psychiatric survivor and an activist. And we wanted to do a video just now, especially on the subject of involuntary outpatient commitment, or also known as assertive community treatment, also known as leash laws. Maybe Ryan, if you want to briefly introduce yourself with anything else beyond what I said, and then maybe also tell us a little bit about exactly what is assertive community treatment.
Thank you, John. Yes, pleased to be with you. The concept of involuntary outpatient commitment, or home-forced drugging, or asserted community treatment, or assisted community treatment, it comes under many different names and many different kind of weasel phrases. But essentially, what we're talking about here is a legislative framework whereby it becomes widespread that individuals who've been labelled with psychiatric labels and whatnot are forced to take drugs outside of a psychiatric hospital setting, right? So we're talking about, in America, we're talking about court orders to take drugs indefinitely in your own home, or in Australia and elsewhere, in the UK, Ireland, New Zealand, and elsewhere in Europe. We're talking about it being done without a court order. It's done extrajudicially. So it's a growing phenomenon whereby in my state alone, my state of Victoria, Australia, it's only got a population of like 4 million people. Yet tens of thousands of individuals each year find themselves under these orders signed by a psychiatrist they're forced to take the drugs, and if they don't take the drugs, the police will remove them to the nearest psychiatric facility, and this is how it is enforced. It's usually enforced with injectable drugs, injectable formats of the drugs, long-acting, slow-release, oil-based injections of neuroleptic or major tranquilizer drugs, aka so-called antipsychotics.
You said that Victoria was the number one setting in the world for per capita implementation of assertive community treatment, right?
That's right.
Yeah. And so basically, what we're talking about is when we say involuntary outpatient commitment or assertive community treatment, right? These are euphemisms basically for forced drugging, right? For basically forcing someone to take or be injected with these poisonous, toxic substances called antipsychotic drugs or neuroleptics against their will while they're still living in the community.
Yes.
That's it, basically, right?
Yes. The advocates, the pushers, the advocates of these forced drugging in the community laws will often say explicitly something along the lines of, as a condition for living in the community, individuals be required to accept treatment. Now, this is completely denying a distressed, a troubled individual the choice, any choice. It's a one-size-fits-all approach where the state will take ownership effectively of your body. And this is for non-criminal citizens, non-criminal innocent human beings who incidentally have never had their body examined or proven diseased by a physician whatsoever. So if you talk about the widespread belief out there in the community that individuals labeled mentally ill ought to be forced to take drugs that alter their body. But I think it is elementary that we seem to have skipped over this critical thing called Where is the evidence that these individuals' bodies or biology is diseased? I myself am a survivor of community commitment. I myself am a survivor of being forced to take psychiatric drugs in my own community as a condition for living free in the community. Now, I don't consider that to be a freedom worth having when the walls of your own skull become the prison cell, right? There's very little qualitative difference in quality of life between being locked in solitary confinement in a psychiatric facility and sitting at home on the couch, drooling, tranquilized like a zombie because you don't have anywhere to escape to, but these drugs are in your bloodstream because some very powerful authorities want them in your bloodstream. Now, this speaks to the idea of bodily integrity, the fundamental human right of bodily integrity. That is, my right to swing my arm ends where your nose begins, all right? So we're talking about innocent people having their skin breached and their bloodstream flooded with drugs designed to alter that person's biology. And this ought to be more controversial than it is because, when you have these laws in place, what happens is the primary driver, the primary motor behind my jurisdiction in Australia becoming the world record setter per capita for forced drugging in the community. And this is admitted by the head of the Mental Health Review Board, which is some kangaroo court body that we have there that oversees all these orders. And they've admitted in the press that nowhere else in the world on a per capita basis are more people subjected to this kind of forced drugging in their own home, right?
Weren't you dangerous to yourself or others, though? Isn't that the justification? I mean, don't these people need treatment because they're mentally ill? I mean, isn't it true that they're dangerous to the community or dangerous to themselves, and that's why they need treatment and they can't recognize it for themselves, and so it's really for their own good? Isn't that's certainly the justification? Is that not true?
Well, again, yeah, that is the justification that we hear time and time again, John. And that, to me, is a kind of paternalistic justification. Now, we're talking about an assertion, the blind assertion of oftentimes just one man or woman, one psychiatrist who hasn't known you your whole life. They've made a so-called assessment of you when you've been brought to a facility, and in the space of 15 minutes of knowing a whole person's life, they've declared arbitrarily that you are, quote unquote, a dangerous person. Well, these things are made. What the public needs to remember is these assertions around dangerousness and the prediction of crime are very controversial, and they're made in an extrajudicial setting. They're not made according to due process, the rules of evidence, the rules of hearsay, the ability to hire legal counsel and defend an allegation of dangerousness made against you. We're talking about pre-crime here. We're talking about some kind of science fiction kind of stuff. They do not have an accurate measure of prediction. It has been shown time and time again that these professionals making these assertions around prediction of what's going to happen, they're often wrong, and you better be right if you're going to take an innocent person's liberty away. So, again, if you're going to say to me again, you asked me, is for your own good, for my own good, or whatever. I mean, again, certainly people can make bad decisions and harm their own health, but part of what freedom is the freedom to fail. If you don't have the freedom to fail, you're on a leash, right? You're on a leash. Now, we could handcuff and round up like dogs every smoker in the world, handcuff them to prevent lung cancer. But you're going to find that, that's a fundamental breach of liberty, and people wouldn't stand for it. But it seems to me, if you're in the class that's at the bottom, the lowest of the low, the people with so-called serious psychiatric labels, it's open slather. You can do to us what you like. The government can take whatever rights they like away. Now, what's happening here in the United States is more and more states are instituting these kind of laws outpatient commitment, forced drugging at home laws. And what you will find, I'm sure, as the decades go on, is that it will grow exponentially, just like it has where I'm from, where the laws have been in place for 25 years.
Whew. You just came from Syracuse visiting with Tom Zotz.
Yeah.
He wrote The Myth of Mental Illness and has written a slew of books since then about issues with psychiatry and human rights. It's clear that you agree with his views about involuntary outpatient commitment, so-called, or assertive community treatment, so-called. What would you call it in plain speech? What would you call this practice?
Outpatient commitment? I'd call it initiating violence against peaceful people. I'd call it imposing your belief system on them or asking your government to do it. You might believe that a person who acts a certain way has a brain disease. You might believe that a person who behaves in a given way has a brain disease. And you're entitled to that belief. But what you're not entitled to do is go and ask your legislators to impose that belief on me and on you and on your neighbor. Because what they are going to do is they're going to brutally and violently impose that belief. And again, you don't have a shred of evidence that my brain is diseased or that anyone's brain is diseased that has been labeled mentally ill or whatnot. And, even if you did.
Assault and battery.
Even if you had evidence that my brain was diseased, that wouldn't be a justification to initiate violence and force against me. I mean, is Michael J. Fox, he suffers a real brain disease, Parkinson's disease. Is the government dictating what drug he should take for his treatment? I mean, this is about having the human right to define for oneself what one considers an acceptable solution to one's problems, right? I'm not denying the reality of extreme distressing extreme states of mind. I've been there. I've survived it. I've been there. I've been everywhere you can throw a scenario at me. I've been there, right? And I'm not going to consider myself brain diseased until a physician has call me crazy, and people have. I'm not going to consider myself brain diseased until a physician has examined my brain. And to me, that seems like a kind of logical position to take.
And the bottom line is that not one person who has been so-called treated, meaning forcibly drugged with neuroleptics, with antipsychotics, not one of those persons has been medically, scientifically diagnosed with evidence of a physical or chemical abnormality that constitutes a brain disease.
That's right.
So I'm with you, Ryan, in calling it psychiatric assault and forced poisoning, and I'm with you in the fight to stop that horrific practice.